Welcome to this episode of The Good, The Bad and The Odd One Out with your host Mark. This time I will be discussing the Star Trek movies that involved the members of the original series cast. That's the first 6. 7 sort of borderline because it includes Kirk and I think Scotty and Jean-Luc Picard, but that I'm leaving for the next gen set of block of movies, which I will be covering at some point, but for this one I'll be covering the first 6. Right, the first one was Star Trek the Motion Picture. It came out really kind of on the back of Star Wars. I'm sure it got funded because of Star Wars. There was always interest in reviving Star Trek because once it went to syndication, it was massively popular. Everyone knows this. And there were plans for a new series called The Next Star Trek, The Next Phase. But for whatever reason, it didn't pan out. But finally, it culminated in this movie, Star Trek The Motion Picture. Came out a couple of years after Star Wars. Reunited the cast of the original, most of the cast of the original series. There was a couple of exceptions. Though I think, thinking about it, every member of the cast was somewhere in there. The ones on... Well, it did include Kirk, Spock, Bones, Scotty, Chekhov, Uhura, and Sulu. And there was also an appearance by Majel Barrett, who often plays Nurse Chapel, but I'm not sure she was credited that. It was never even discussed, really. And I think the Grace Lee Whitney was in it as a non-speaking cameo, but as another character. She often played Yeoman Rand in the first series. Anyway, this film gets underway. It's directed by Robert Wise, who's got quite a pedigree as a director. Probably his most famous movie is The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original one. There was a pretty cool one with the giant robot called Gort and the words Clotu Baradenicta. But he was drafted in to direct this. Now, there was some brilliant model work in this. There's like long lingering shots of the Enterprise and it looks really nice. And the effects aren't bad. Well, the effects are like almost twofold. Some of it early on, when they're near the planet Earth and stuff like that, the effects are really quite poor. But once they kind of get out into space and facing the Vija thing that they've got to try and communicate with, actually, effects are really quite marvellous. Really, really nice. There's a few shonky bits. For example, when you see Spock floating around in his spacesuit, it looks like a special effect rather than reality, if you know what I mean. But it's not bad, and I kind of liked it. And this was a strange film. It's a ponderous, dull, slow film, for one thing. But there are bits in it that are quite wonderful and great. That I think they were aiming more for a 2001 kind of vibe rather than a Star Wars kind of vibe. I guess they realised they couldn't really compete with Star Wars. But they went a bit too po-faced and serious with this first one. And I'm not sure it was a financial flop, but it was like not well regarded as a movie. And I'd say this is one of the weaker entries of the entire series. Well, we'll get onto it. I'd give it 63 out of 100, and we'll discuss the other ratings as we go. It's what my notes on it, I have written, this is like watching Flash Gordon directed by Ingmar Bergman with someone writing very bad cue cards. The dialogue didn't really work well. The only bits I really the bits with the inside the Vija were quite cool, and the bits on the planet Vulcan were very, very cool too. And it was kind of nice to see the whole Federation thing. But they spent like I say, it was dull and ponderous. I think really they realised how good the model work was and decided to spend way too long on outside shots of showing how wonderful it was, and it was dull. And it was just dull. You can't spend 3 or 4 minutes just looking at the Starship Enterprise without people getting bored. So it has its problems. But as I say, 63 out of 100. Right. So the next entry on this, I think they realised they did wrong, and they tried to sort of freshen it up a bit. They brought in a guy called, I think, Nick Mayer for Star Trek 2, and he managed to sort of drag from this ponderous, dull stuff I think he probably must have watched every single episode and thought long and hard about it, and they came to The Wrath of Khan. Now, this is an unusual film. I think it's probably the only instance of a movie being a sequel to an episode of a TV show. It's kind of spectacularly good. And one of the reasons it is so good is they've got a great villain. And if you're a Trekkie, you know Trek lore, you know Khan is already before you get to this. And you're kind of aware there's a history with him and Kirk, and you know how super intelligent and strong Khan is. And the whole angle, they set out really well, in Space Seed, which we've covered fairly early on one of our earliest podcasts, I think like number 7 or 8. No, it was a bit later than that, maybe number 20 or 30. We did a commentary of Space Seed. So if you watch the episode and listen to our one, you can get our views on Space Seed. Good episode though. Anyway, Khan was stranded, and his crew was stranded on this planet, which went out of control and made it a desert planet. And he grew basically a huge hatred for Kirk for never coming back and checking on them. The episode Spacey didn't end with him hating Kirk. He appreciated that Kirk was doing him a favour by leaving on this planet and letting him carve his own future out on it. But what he did hate was the fact Kirk never came back once the planet had decayed out of control. Now, this is a fun film. It's not perfect. There are a few slow spots in the first half, but once it really gets going in space, it really motors. There continue to be a few odd spots in it, and the most significant one being that basically his crew are just there as shot room dummies. They don't really serve any purpose. They sometimes point out they should just escape to him, and he just tells them to shut up. Everything's they're all submissive to Khan, and the sort of our on-screen view of what's going on is that they don't really perform any part other than being, filling space. Khan is what it's all about. I guess that's appropriate, but that's the only flaw really I can think of. And I like some of the ideas in this film, the idea of the Genesis device. Khan being so driven by revenge, he can't just make a simple escape, and it's not even that Kirk has to stop him because he's a Superman. If he gets out, there'll be trouble. It's basically Kirk and the Enterprise crew fighting for their lives against Khan, but knowing he's smarter and stronger, so they have to try and be crafty. Really, as the picture also, apart from being a good old rollicking adventure, it's got lots of interesting motifs and ideas. It's lots of imagery, words, suggestions discussing kind of life and death. The Genesis device creating life from nothing, and we get to the death of Spock at the end. That's obviously a death motive, and there's some interesting stuff. I really love some of the speeches Khan gives about what he feels about Kirk. I do have a little problem, which is I feel a bit bad about even it being a problem. I'm not a fan of the bagpipes at the end. I think they feel a bit dopey to me. I think it's when I actually went to see it in the cinema that those bagpipes, after a really sad, affecting scene with Spock, those bagpipes, it got a laugh out of the audience because it was kind of felt ridiculous, and that's always stuck with me. And I have trouble with the bagpipes, but I'm fine watching the film and not commenting on it. It's just, I appreciate that a lot of people do like the bagpipes. I think they're really good. We've covered Wrath of Khan in its own podcast at number 20 or something like that, and when I discussed it with Sam, he thought the bagpipe hits was really good, so that goes to show it takes all sorts. However, this to me is the best Star Trek film. I have seen them all, including the most recent one, and I still think Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek film. Rather good, really affecting ending with the death of Spock. I can see why Nimoy was interested. He was really interested in doing a death scene. He didn't necessarily want Spock to die, but he wanted to do a death scene, and that was cool. This was followed on by Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. They obviously felt they needed to bring Spock back, and they needed to think of a good idea, and they came up with quite a good solution, in my opinion, involving the Genesis planet and its instability and its ability to sort of generate new life. And they basically, from the cells of the dead Spock, they've got a regenerating Spock from his cells, who starts off as young, gets older and older very fast. coupled with the fact Spock has used the mind meld to put his brain inside Bones' brain, so his mind is propagated and present. And there's some really good scenes in this. There's scenes where someone's in Spock's quarters sitting in the dark, and when someone in the dark starts talking, it sounds like Spock, but it turns out to be Bones, and Bones feels like he's going crazy. And there's some interesting stuff with Spock's father as well. And most interesting of all to me was where we saw the Klingons proper in it from the film series for the first time. We saw them briefly in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, but it was really they were there flying a bird of prey towards the Voyage device, and they got destroyed, and that was all we saw of them. Introduced their like Cornish pasty type heads, but here we see a proper crew. Christopher Lloyd being the bad guy, Krug. Now, there's no, we had obviously seen in the original series where they look like slightly darker Mexicans, but in this we start to get a feel for the Klingon culture stuff. And I think Christopher Lloyd did a bang-up job here. He established them as fierce, warrior-like, not entirely animalistic, which is sometimes portrayed as. He's got some sense of, let's call it a respect. For example, there's a bit where Kirk asks him for a minute to just discuss something with his crew when he's just about to surrender, and he fairly relaxedly says take two, and it's not like a pompous way. It's like one warrior acknowledging to another that they understand what's got to happen, and that's how it's going to be. And I thought it was kind of quite cool. And I always find Klingon ships really cool to see inside, and it was kind of nice to see how they behaved. How he had a weird pet on deck with him, which was kind of a weird lizard dog thing, Muppet, and it was kind of cool. And I think Christopher Lloyd was really good. And apparently it was quite a kind of, when the director, I think it was Nimoy. Oh, by the way, Nimoy directed this one. I think it was his first directing job, and he had to argue quite hard, I believe, to get Christopher Lloyd, because Christopher Lloyd was seen as a comedy actor, even though he'd done lots of other really nice roles. He'd been in One for Overcooked Nest in a mostly non-speaking part, but he was still really good as an actor in that. And he was known for being Reverend Jim on Taxi, which is a great comedy character. But I think Christopher Lloyd did a bang-up job here, and this is one of the, there's this saying about even Trek films are the best ones, and the odd ones are usually rubbish. This one does that. You can't say that about this one. This one is a good, solid one. And a rather fine direction job from Leonard Nimoy, who luckily wasn't in it most of it, so he could really concentrate on it. To me, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and the next one, Voyage Home, form their own little internal trilogy inside the bigger series. They are one long story, and they kind of, Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock are very closely bound in terms of style and darkness and sort of serious themes. Whereas Voyage Home, which we're coming to, is a little lighter in tone. Anyway, I really, really enjoyed this one. One thing I will say, I really like Kirstie Alley in Wrath of Khan. I thought she was really good. She didn't return for this. Her character was here, who was Sarvik, but she was replaced, and she helps Spock, the young Spock, survive the sort of pain and ordeal of having Ponfar, the Vulcan sort of fever, where they have to mate or die, that affects them every 7 years, but this poor lad's getting it about every half an hour with his rate of growth. There's lots of not even fan fiction. I think it might even be canon. There's canon lore where she actually has sex with the young Spock to stop him dying during his Ponfar. Though Spock doesn't remember this because his mind's not in place at this point. And she even fathers his child, I believe. She is part of like an external story to this. So I don't know much about that. I'm not that much of a Trekkie to know about that. But it's kind of an interesting set of ideas. So then we get on to Star Trek 4. Right, if I give a rating to this, well, I didn't rate. I'd say this is a really good entry, really good. I wouldn't say it was as great as Wrath of Khan, but it's close. It's close. I think this is probably my second favourite out of the original cast Star Trek movies. Wrath of Khan is really high up there, and I'd say that's my favourite out of all Star Trek movies. But I'd say Search for Spock is my favourite, second favourite of the first six movies. Okay, then we go on to Voyage Home, where they find that some big. It's kind of almost a reprise of the Voyage story, in that it's about a big space probe of unknown origin, alien probe that's signaling Earth but causing massive destruction. Someone works out, probably Spock works out, it's the sound, doing the calling sound of a whale. All the whales are extinct on the planet, so therefore it can't be responded to. Therefore, it will keep destroying things. And Spock works out if they go back to the late 20th century, they can get some whales and bring them back. By very slingshotting around the sun, all this, that, and the other. They've done it before in the TV series, so there was a precedent. But it was a massive calculation, and Kirk said, "Just get on with it." And Spock says, "I can't possibly know every variable." And Kirk says something like, "You're going to have to just wing it." Anyway, they do. They end up in 80s San Francisco, where they describe the inhabitants as like hostile, and it's a primitive sort of savage culture and stuff like that. There's a nice touch at one point where Spock just the nerve pinch off on this annoying oafish sort of punk on a bus who's playing his music too loud, and Spock just gives him the pinch and knocks him out. That's pretty funny. And this one's a way lighter film. It's funny, it's amusing. The themes in it are kind of interesting. It's also interesting they had to destroy the Enterprise at the end of number 3, and they actually use a Klingon bird of prey, which has got a cloaking device. So when they go back to San Francisco, they can actually cloak and land. So it's invisible. It's kind of cool. And one of the great things about this series is most of the cast are given something to do. The most outstanding and amusing one really is Chekhov wandering around asking people about nuclear vessels, and is obviously Russian. A Russian wandering around asking about nuclear submarines is going to draw attention, and he does get captured, and there's a bit of shenanigans where he has to escape, but they manage to, I think they get hold of either a communicator or a phaser, I can't remember now. And there's a whole story about that going into fan or sort of book Star Trek fiction, where that technology somehow gets involved in the rise of Khan, which is based in the 90s, which did happen, but it was all secret. So as far as us in 2013 are concerned, we don't know anything about Khan, but there was a secret sort of society that raised Khan up, and it got banished and all that. So the whole Khan thing did actually, in Star Trek lore, did actually go on, but it was all in secret. So that keeps things consistent. And somehow this phaser stroke communicator was involved, the technology in that somehow got involved, or was involved with the creation or the propagation of Khan's power. Anyway, it's another aside. Anyway, it all pays off. There's kind of a fun bit where the whales are being chased by whalers, so to stop the whalers, they decloak, so it looks like a spaceship's just appeared, scaring the life out of these fishermen, and then they get the whales into tank. There's also some fun stuff, business with Scotty, designing tanks and water tanks to house the whales so they can get back. And the model work of the whales was exceptionally good. In fact, I believe there were protests about they'd film whales and they weren't allowed to, and all this, that, and the other. And then someone pointed out, no, they didn't film whales. Apart from one bit, there was a sort of external film of whale, which was okay. But all the water shots of whales, it was all model work, and people, protesters, thought they were actually the real whales. Very good model work, really exceptionally good. Good film, this. Really quite enjoyed it. It runs along at a breeze, and it does feel like a bit of relief after the sort of more heavy stuff that went on in 2 and 3. And I have to say, I'd put this on a par with, say, I like it better than the first one. I like it better than the fifth one, which I'll come on to. I'll put it on a sort of equal footing with Star Trek 6, actually. It's about that sort of level, though they are entirely different films. Star Trek 5. Well. This one was directed by William Shatner. And he had this whole idea about he wanted Kirk to sort of face off the God and sort of ask God what he's about. I think was the initial idea, and then it all propagated from there. Anyway, they wanted to get Sean Connery in as like this character Spock, but Sean Connery wasn't interested, I think he was tied to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And so they cast a different actor whose name I can't remember. He was pretty good though, and he's called Spock. And they talk about going to this legendary space place called Shakari, which sounds like half a cross between Shangri-La and half Sean Connery. Yeah. Anyway, he's a rather good actor, and he plays Spock's half brother, who's and he's a Vulcan that has embraced his emotional side. He's happy to laugh and stuff like that, and he's got this power to make people bring out their pain, what pains them in their life, and help them feel better about it. So everyone sort of gets on his side. Yeah. Bits of this I like. Bits of this just quite appallingly bad. Oh, they're pretty bad. Some of the dialogue that I'm pretty sure Shatner was involved in, he's written what he thought was amusing, just is very flat and like feels kind of juvenile. It pains me to say this because I really like William Shatner, but it's the sort of thing someone would say who thinks they're funny, but they're not funny, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of that kind of dialogue going on. Some of the plot bits don't make sense. However, I still kind of like this film. It's not as bad as it's often held up to be. I don't think it remains entertaining. There are, like I say, some of the dialogue's pretty poor, but there are some scenes that I really like. One exceptionally good scene, I think, is where Spock starts confronting each members of the crew about their emotion, and this feels like it's written by someone else because it's so good compared to the rest of the film. He helps Bones explore the pain he feels over the death of his own father. It's things like that. He exposed people's emotions, and by helping them with this, he gets them on his side. But when he comes to try and do the same to Kirk, Kirk refuses and says, "No, I want my pain. It's part of me. It keeps me who I am," which is a really interesting kind of discussion, which doesn't really get followed that much. Having said that, there's not really a need to. It makes the point well, and that's it, fine. But there's some other silly stuff. There's a fan dance by Uhura. I felt a bit bad for Nichelle Nicole. She's fairly old at this point, and now she's a nice looking lady. It's not. It's just silly. A fan dance to get people's attention in the middle of a desert. It's just dopey. They should have just taken them out of like Commandos or something like that, instead of trying to get their attention by getting a middle-aged woman to fan dance. It's just silly. The ending involving Kirk questioning God seems a bit contrived. Also, another thing that bothers me about the film is how easy the entire his crew of 20 odd years, all get behind this guy that's popped out of nowhere because he can help them with some worries that they've got. That seemed way too contrived. I have other issues as well. The whole I was going to say the gravity boots. Sorry, the rocket boots that Spock wears just seem a bit silly. A bit too Flash Gordon rather than Star Trek. But there are bits I like in this film. Like I say, I like the bit where Cyborg's got the emotional thing. I do like the scenes of the guy, and I've seen this made fun of, but I kind of like the scenes between Spock, Bones, and Kirk I was going to say Yellowstone Park, where they're teaching him row your boat, and Spock questions the meaning of the song. It doesn't make sense to him. Life is but a dream. I thought that was kind of fun, and I like the fact the film ended with a little intimate scene recapping that. I thought that was rather good. Whereas the actual, the action climax of the film, I thought was pretty silly. God getting left behind. Now, apparently, I've read Shatner's book. Star Trek Movie Memories. He talks about this film and he was really proud of it, and like the fact no one liked it. But he did say they had like rock monsters coming out of the ground to attack them. He said, but they looked quite abysmal. Because when I read this, I thought, I don't remember any rock monsters. And he talked about it, and he said he wanted to go back and reshoot, but the studio flat refused. So they had to kind of... It looks to me they had to re-edit to cut those out because they were so abysmally ill. I'd like to see them. I'm going to check YouTube, see if they're on there. I've never seen them. But they might be in the extras somewhere, maybe, actually. However, it wasn't a bad film. I preferred it to say the motion picture, but it is one of the weaker ones of the 6. Right, that brings us on to Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Right, now this is a definite raise in quality after number 5. I think Nick Mayer came back as the director of Star Trek 2, and it gives it a quite definite air of militarism and proper decorum, I think, is how I can put it. Basically, Kirk's tasked with going to help with negotiations with the Klingon base. Moon has exploded, polluting their system, which means their oxygen will run out in 50 years. Let's not worry about all the technical. These are an advanced technical race; they can figure it out. But anyway, they want, that's going to take a lot of money, and it's going to affect their military budget, and so they have to. The Federation decide they want to go for most major parts of the Federation, not all of them, decide they want to sue for peace to try and get peace with the Klingons, and so that they can demilitarize somewhat and use their money to solve their own problems. And it's kind of a parable about Chernobyl and Russia, and there's also elements of president of the US sending in rescue helicopters and stuff to rescue hostages. There's talk along those lines of them rescuing Kirk, because at one point Kirk gets blamed for the death of an assassination of an ambassador, and they talk about going to rescue him before he faces trial. However, the Klingons make it clear that part of their conditions for coming to the table is Kirk has to stand trial and suffer any consequences that come from that, which the Federation do agree to. Right, so there's some cool stuff in this. I like the whole vibe of reconciliation. It's kind of an interesting one. And there is one line that always makes me laugh where Kirk's like perplexed about why would they send him to such a thing, and Spock says there's an old Vulcan proverb, only Nixon can go to China. I think that's a really class line. And it just explains exactly what the thinking is there, and it's kind of cool. However, what happens is there are various elements in all sorts, not just Klingons, Romulans are involved too, where actually a war is considered the better option by some people, and they want to precipitate a war. From that comes the whole plot of the ambassador getting assassinated. Kirk beams onto the ship to stop them attacking, to show willing, and he goes with Bones, and to Bones is a doctor, and he tries to save the ambassador, but he dies, and they have to face trial, and then they get sentenced to some ice planet for the rest of their lives. The whole ice thing's a bit weak, to my opinion. It's kind of a contrivance and could be made a lot, more straightforward. But while they're messing about on this ice planet, Spock's then conducting an investigation, very Sherlock Holmes-like in deduction and stuff. And he even quotes a line which he attributes to one of his ancestors that's actually from Sherlock Holmes, which is, when you eliminate the impossible, whatever's left, however improbable, must be the truth. Something like that. And it's kind of Spock being Holmes, old school Sherlock Holmes in this, which is kind of cool. And he's investigating with the help of another Vulcan female played by Kim Cattrall, called Valeris, which is interesting because I've only ever heard Vulcan females start with letter T and males start with S. There's Sarek and Spock and T'Pau and T'Pring and stuff like that. But this one's called Valeris, which is kind of interesting. And there's a whole investigation there. And if you haven't seen this film, the next 20, say 30 seconds will spoil something for you. Turns out Valeris is on the bad guy's side. And there's a really great scene where Spock has to mind meld with her. And it's almost played like a kind of brutalisation or even like a mind rape that Spock's doing her to find out who the other people are involved. And even Uhura's like, you can see she's kind of aghast at it, and Spock's ashamed of himself at the end of it too, but he felt he had no choice. And to see Spock angry, and there's another great line by Nimoy in here where Velos is talking to him about logic, and he just goes, logic. Logic's the beginning of wisdom, not the end. Which I think is a great line again, really shows an understanding of Spock. It's almost a line that Nimoy could have come up with himself. He may well have, I don't know, but it's a really excellent line. And works really well, and it's a cool little film. It ends with everything being sorted out and the Klingons being indulging in peace. There's a few action bits, but that isn't really the point of this film. The drama and the tension are the exciting bits. And I felt the ice planet stuff was a little weak and could have been skirted through quicker. And they had a model called Imanin as one of the characters on the ice planet, which didn't help because she couldn't act. She was a shape changer, which helped a little, but her voice was still in it even when she changed shape, and she couldn't voice act either, so that didn't help. But the rest of them was really solid. The crew looked pretty good, it looked really nice, had a really nice ending, and it did feel like this was going to be the last film. The way they it was their swan song, and the way they played it was really nice. You could tell it was like, this is the final voyage where I'm the captain kind of stuff, and it ends really nicely. Really enjoyed this. I'd put it up there with, say, Star Trek 4. So to our mind, of these 6, the best one by far is Wrath of Khan, followed at the next level by Search for Spock. Then just underneath those is number 4 and number 6. They're alright. Then number 5 hedges it just. It's a bit more entertaining and shorter than the motion picture. And the worst one is the motion picture. But having said that, even that's not bad. It's just a bit dull in spots. But I still kind of enjoyed it. Overall, a really solid series. And I'm really looking forward to getting... Well, I say that. I'm looking forward to looking at some of the next 4 films. I will be moving on to the next 4 films. We've already covered on the main podcast Star Trek 2, the most recent one. We've never done Star Trek. I might actually cover the 4 next gen films. I'm really not looking forward to Generations, that has to be said. I went to see the pictures and I thought it was quite poor, but I haven't seen it since it came out, so it's over, I think, probably 15 years now. I'm not, just something like that. So I'm going to watch it again just to see. Then I'm going to move on to the next, certainly move on to the next 3 next gen movies, and I might throw in Star Trek the reboot as well, though I got a feeling we've done it, but maybe we haven't, I'm not sure. So next time we come to Star Trek, it'll be those 4 films. I'll probably break it up a bit. I'm planning to do some James Bond, more James Bond maybe, and I'm also going to be doing the Ginger Snaps movies. There's 3 of those horror films, and I want to try and cover those too. So I'm going to be doing those in the meantime, but then I'll be coming back to Star Trek. Hope you enjoyed this one. On our main, but I mean the odd one out ones I'll do as a sideline, and they tend to be shorter, though this one's run on a bit than the main one. But our main one's coming up to 100 episodes, so really it would be really nice if we could get some feedback in for our 100th episode. So please write in info@thegoodthebadandtheodd.com. Either an email, you can attach an MP3 if you want to drop a little sound in our podcast. It'd be nice to hear from anyone. Or if not that, please give us a rating on the iTunes store. It would really help. We still never get enough ratings to even register as being rated, and if we could just get enough ratings to get onto that, some of the boards, even if we're like 200 down, getting on the board would help our numbers a bit and give us some encouragement. We don't ask people for any financial stuff or anything like that, but it'd be kind of nice just to get enough ratings on that. So if you could, that'd be really nice. Also, if you enjoy this, tell your friends. If they're filmies, they might enjoy us too. Alright then, bye from me.
I love Star Trek. I really wanna watch me Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I really wanna watch me Star Trek. The Starship Enterprise has got the illest group of people. Yeah. Making the galaxy a funky place to mingle. So here we go, break it down. Captain Kirk, James C. Kirk, middle name stands for Tiberius.